I'm Oliver, and what you're about to hear is a glimpse beyond the veil of this world. For years, I've listened to those who died and came back transformed. I share their voices so far, exactly as they told them. These are not fantasies. They are lived truths, encounters with something greater, divine, terrifying, or both. Prepare your soul, because once you've seen what lies beyond death, life is never the same.
If you're ready to walk this journey with me, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications. You won't want to miss what comes next.
My name is Daniel Arriaga. I'm 59 years old. For over 4 decades, I wore a collar, offered blessings, stood behind altars, and spoke words that echoed through sacred halls built more on prestige than prayer. For years, I believed I was serving God. I now understand that I was serving a system, one that wore a holy face but walked with political feet. I spent years convincing others of a gospel I myself had stopped living. Today, I'm here not to accuse, but to confess. Not to judge, but to reveal. What I saw, what I allowed, and what I lost, it all led me to the place I'm in now. And maybe, just maybe, my story can shake someone awake before it's too late. Because if truth is what sets us free, then silence is the chain that keeps us bound. I was born in a small town tucked between hills and dust. My father passed when I was 7, and my mother, a seamstress, raised 3 boys with nothing but her calloused hands and unwavering faith. Of the 3, I was the quiet one, the boy who lingered in the chapel longer than most. Not because I understood God, but because it was the only place where I felt seen. When the priest smiled at me, when the women at prayer handed me bread, I felt noticed. That was all I wanted back then. Not holiness, not heaven, just to matter. I joined the seminary at 16, not driven by divine fire, but by the fragile hope that perhaps behind that collar, I'd finally be heard. I didn't enter to find God. I entered to escape invisibility. The seminary was cold and structured. Latin, theology, and silence. There were moments when I felt close to something divine, those early morning hymns echoing in empty halls. But more often, I felt like I was learning to perform rather than believe. The rules were strict, the hierarchy tighter than any family I'd known. I learned how to obey, how to smile without joy, how to nod while doubting. I rose quickly. People said I had a gift. I knew it wasn't a gift, it was survival. I'd learned early how to say the right thing, how to be what others needed, and the church rewarded that kind of man. I was sent to Rome to continue my education, the dream of my mother, the pride of my town, and the start of the silence I would live inside for decades. Rome was beautiful. The stones whispered history, and the incense curled through the air like sacred smoke. I wanted to believe I was walking in the footsteps of saints, but I often felt more like a tourist in a museum of power. I graduated with distinction, was promoted to teaching, and soon stood among the polished elite of the church. I told myself I could make a difference from the inside, that by climbing higher, I could lift others up. But the higher I rose, the more I compromised. I stopped asking questions. I started memorizing answers. I was no longer praying. I was performing a ritual I had perfected. I didn't realize I was drifting until I could no longer hear his voice. The voice that once stirred me in poverty had been drowned by applause. I became bishop at 43, a ceremony of gold and song. People kissed my hand, bowed before me. I smiled, but inside I was hollow. My sermons were praised, my letters published, but the night was my enemy. I would lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had become a man I didn't recognize. Yet I told myself it was for the church, for God, that this discomfort was part of the burden. I even wore it like a badge. I spoke of sacrifice while living in marble corridors. I preached compassion from pulpits that silenced the suffering. Still, I kept going. Momentum has a power stronger than belief, and I was too far in to step out. Or so I thought. One winter evening, I led a Christmas mass inside a cathedral lined with diplomats and dignitaries. The choir sang, the cameras flashed. I gave a sermon about mercy. I saw hands lift in praise. But outside, just beyond the ornate doors, a man slept in the cold, his body curled on cardboard. I passed him as I returned to the warmth of my quarters. I didn't stop. I didn't look. I blessed strangers across the world, but walked past the Christ lying in the street. That night, I couldn't sleep. His face haunted me, not because I knew him, but because I didn't. I had preached mercy, yet withheld it with my eyes. That was the first crack. A small fracture in the wall I had spent my whole life building. Years passed. I became skilled at diplomacy. I signed documents without reading, nodded in meetings without understanding. I heard stories I wish I could forget, of transfers, of hush money, of reputations guarded more fiercely than truth. When I raised concerns, I was reminded the church must remain stable, unity over truth, silence over scandal. One cardinal once told me with a chuckle, "Sanctity doesn't win battles, silence does." I smiled with him, but I broke a little more inside. I began writing at night, pages I never intended to publish. I wrote to breathe, to remember, to scream on paper what I couldn't say aloud. And though no one saw them, those words became my tether to honesty. Then came the folder. A meeting, discreet and unannounced. 6 men. A table, thick with files. I opened one. It looked routine at first. Budgets, schedules. But then I read the signatures, the names of victims, the coded transfers, the agreements masked in legal language, but soaked in sin. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't vague. It was real. Documented. Signed. "The robe protects, it does not expose." One line read, underlined in red. I closed the folder, looked around the table. No one flinched. They spoke in numbers, not names, strategies, not sorrow. I wanted to speak. My throat refused. I left that room with my soul on fire and my mouth sealed shut. I knew then, I could never unsee what I had seen. I sought refuge in prayer, but found only silence. My hands trembled over the rosary, not from reverence but from dread. I felt like an actor who'd forgotten the lines mid-performance. I went through the motions, blessing, preaching, officiating, all with a face carved into calm. Inside, I was crumbling. I tried to speak with a close colleague to hint at what I'd seen. He didn't seem surprised. "It's always been like this," he said softly. "Our job is to protect the image, not stir the fire." That phrase haunted me, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Not morally, but structurally. The system didn't run on grace, it ran on appearances, and I had helped keep the machinery running. I started withdrawing from public duties, citing health, spiritual rest, any excuse that would buy me time. I wandered through cloisters with heavy feet, each echo a reminder of the voices I had ignored. I thought of my mother, her tears when I was ordained, her belief that I was chosen by God. How would she feel knowing that her son had traded truth for titles? I thought of the faithful who donated coins and hope, while their offerings were redirected to cover silence. The dissonance grew unbearable. I looked at my reflection and saw not a shepherd, but a polished functionary of an empire I no longer believed in. I needed space to breathe, to listen, to remember what his voice even sounded like. I retreated to a Franciscan convent far from the marble and power. 12 sisters, a stone chapel, a small room with a single bed. They welcomed me without questions. No fanfare, no recognition. There, I was not Bishop Arriaga. I was simply Daniel. I walked their gardens, ate bread and soup, tried to pray, not as a prelate but as a broken man. I met Sister Clara, a woman in her 80s whose gaze pierced through silence. She asked me, "When you pray, do you speak to Jesus or to the hierarchy?" I tried to answer with theology. She stopped me. "Don't answer me. Answer him." That night in the chapel, I did not recite. I just sat, eyes closed, and begged, "If you still want me, speak." In the quiet, a memory returned. I was 15, kneeling in a dirt-floor chapel, trembling as I whispered, "If you need me, I'm here." That boy had been brave. That boy had meant it. What had happened to him? Power happened. Approval happened. The slow erosion of integrity disguised as duty. I cried, not with rage, but with sorrow, for what I had become, for what I had lost. Sister Clara later told me, "I was deaf for years too. I thought obedience was enough, but when you stop hearing him, you start hearing everything else." That resonated more deeply than any sermon I had preached. I began to speak with her, to tell her what I had seen, what I had allowed, She listened without interruption, and when I finished, she said, "God already knew, but now you do too. That truth can set you free." I returned to Rome changed, but not loud. I carried no manifestos, no fury, just a quiet fire. The Vatican noticed. I was called to a meeting, a room with no windows. 3 men, polite, practiced. They asked about my health, about my reflections. Then came the real message. "We hear you've been unsettled. We urge caution. The church values stability." They offered me a new post, visibility, prestige, a seat closer to the Pope. The cost? Silence. My silence. It wasn't said, but it was clear. I left that meeting feeling like a man standing on a frozen lake, every step a risk of collapse. Phone calls came, anonymous notes, whispers designed to remind me, "You are watched, you are tolerated, but not free." I refused the promotion. I didn't protest. I simply did not respond. A second meeting followed. This time, I was offered a sabbatical for spiritual reflection, a dismissal dressed as mercy. I accepted, not out of fear, out of resolve. I returned to Mexico, to a small town in the south, found a room to rent from a kind family who didn't know or care who I had once been. I left my vestments in a suitcase, wore cotton shirts, walked barefoot on cracked streets. People called me Don Daniel, not bishop, not father, just Daniel. I began attending a humble chapel on Sundays. Tin roof, wooden benches, a priest who stuttered when nervous but spoke from the heart. The songs were off-key, but real. There, I wept again, because I felt something I hadn't in years. God. I found a local gathering, led by a young man named Marcos. No altar, no incense, just a Bible, plastic chairs, and hearts on fire. He preached with passion, not polish. Jesus didn't come to control, he said. He came to restore. I sat at the back, unnoticed, unhonored, unburdened. When the service ended, he approached me. First time, I nodded. "Welcome. You don't need to understand everything. Just be willing to listen." He didn't know who I was, or maybe he did, but he treated me like a brother, not a bishop. I returned the next week, and the next. I stopped correcting, stopped analyzing. I listened, and in that listening, something in me began to break, and then rebuild. One quiet surrender at a time. Brick by brick. Now that I've spoken, I feel lighter, not because the pain has left me, but because the silence has. Telling this story has not been about seeking justice from men or revenge from institutions. It has been about returning to the voice I silenced for far too long. I'm not sharing this to destroy, but to rebuild. To remind someone out there, someone listening right now, that it is never too late to come home. Maybe you've served religion but lost your connection to Jesus. Maybe you've performed faith while feeling empty. Maybe you've been wounded by the church, by those meant to guide you. I understand that. I lived it, but I also discovered something greater. Jesus never stopped waiting. Don't let a collar, a pulpit, or a past mistake keep you from him. Don't believe the lie that it's too late, or that you're too broken to be restored. I thought I was lost forever, buried under layers of obedience, position, and guilt. But it was in a small chapel, among strangers, with nothing left to prove, that I heard his voice again. Not loud, not dramatic, just there, gentle, waiting. And that voice, that whisper, has been calling you too. Not to religion, not to reputation, but to relationship. Jesus is not asking for perfection. He's asking for surrender. He's not counting how far you've wandered. He's opening his arms to welcome you back. If this testimony spoke to something in you, if you felt that pull deep inside, don't ignore it. Respond. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need a title. You don't need a building. All you need is a heart that says, "I'm listening." And if that's you, take a step right now. Inscribe your heart with the truth, not just your memory. Say his name, out loud or in silence. Ask him to speak again. And he will. I promise you he will. Because he's been speaking all along. All we needed was the courage to stop and hear. Subscribe to this channel, not just to hear more stories, but to stay on a path that leads you closer to Jesus. Let this place be a sanctuary of honesty, a home for those who are weary of pretending. Share this video with someone who's been questioning, someone who's been quiet for too long. Let them know they are not alone, that grace still reaches them, that it is not over, that Jesus still saves, still restores, still walks with those who have lost their way. Follow Jesus. Not because I say so, but because when I stopped following everything else, he was the only one still standing beside me. Let him become the center again. Not the structure, not the approval, not the performance, just him. Surrender your silence, your wounds, your shame, and take hold of a life that is real. There is nothing you've done that he cannot redeem. There is no mask thick enough to hide from his mercy, and there is no title, no fall, no fear that can keep him from reaching you if you just turn your face toward him. And if you ever feel alone in this walk, come back here. This space is not for saints. It's for the wounded, the seekers, the ones who lost the fire but still carry the ashes. We'll walk together, we'll fall and rise together. And as we do, we'll find that the gospel was never about climbing higher. It was about coming closer to him, to each other, to the truth. Because that's where healing begins. That's where faith begins. That's where life begins again. Thank you for listening, not just with your ears, but with your heart. I didn't speak today to impress you. I spoke because I had to. Because someone out there needed to know they're not alone. That someone who once stood behind a marble pulpit can now kneel on dusty ground and still be found. If that someone is you, I see you. I'm with you. And most importantly, Jesus is calling you. He never stopped. Until next time, stay close to the voice that saves. Stay rooted in truth. Stay free. I'll be here, waiting, walking, and believing with you.